everyone, and welcome to Lying Around Connecticut with Carol and Harry. I am Carol Kearns. My husband, Harry Shue, is our co-host. Our mission for the show is twofold: to provide information about Connecticut Lions events and to showcase the many different organizations and causes that Lions support locally, regionally, and internationally. Harry?
Good evening and welcome. Please consult our website at www.lions23b.org or your district spirit for more information on coming events.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lying Around Connecticut with Carol and Harry.
We are here at Charlotte Hungerford Hospital. This is a seminar presentation given by our favorite doctor, Egils Bogdanovich. It's going to be on diabetes, which, of course, as you know, is one of our major causes, and Lions Clubs International Foundation, Lions Clubs International. We are big supporters, we being the Harwinton Lions, as well as the Torrington Lions, of the Diabetes Center here at Charlotte Hungerford and Torrington. This is also the eve of Diabetes, World Diabetes Day, which is tomorrow, November 14th. So this is going to be a very informative presentation on what's new in diabetes. So on with the show.
Well, thanks for coming out, everybody. I'm Egils Bogdanovich. I work here up the hill with my spiritual advisor, Loie. And Nancy, our manager. And May, who we recently fired. But every year we get together, we talk about what's new. I'd like to start a little bit with, what diabetes is. Is there anybody here that doesn't have diabetes? Do you want to prevent diabetes? Okay, so we'll talk to some minutes about that. We'll talk about what diabetes is, and then we'll talk about a lot of new medications that are available for type 2 diabetes, and then we'll finish up with a couple of things on type 1 diabetes. I've had type 1 diabetes for 38 years now. I developed it when I was finishing Marine Corps Officer Candidate School, on my way to flight school pretty much. Lost 30 pounds in 2 weeks, and it was the best thing that ever happened. Because I stayed with my wonderful wife and worked with all these great people. But, where did we start? Anybody know who this is? Loie?
Banting and Best.
All right, Banting and Best. So this is 1922. On the right is Frederick Banting, who was a World War I surgeon. The war has been over. He's looking for something to do. Went to a conference where they were talking about diabetes and thought it had something to do with his gland on pancreas. On the left is George Best, who was a medical student. And together, they worked in the lab in Toronto, and the rest is history, so to speak. They discovered insulin. Interesting thing is George Best on the left was a med student. And there was another student, Clark Noble. They flipped a coin as to who was going to stay with Banting. I don't know if Best won or lost the toss, because Banting was a pretty tough guy to work with. He got in fistfights in the lab. But in any case, George Best, ended up, splitting the Nobel Prize with Banting. But the other guy, Noble, is known as the forgotten researcher, because he actually developed a chemotherapy. It's called vinblastine. Some of you had cancer 30 years ago. That would have been one of the agents used. So he was a student that actually did pretty well. So I think Banting would have done pretty well with either one. But down there in the middle, that's Marjorie. Marjorie, the longevity dog. And this is a plaque to Marjorie that's in their lab at the University of Toronto. Banting, early on, thought that ligating the duct to the pancreas so that it sort of killed itself would leave just the insulin-producing cells. They didn't call it insulin, they just called it the substance. And he sort of messed up the research, but stumbled upon this extract that he gave this kid, Leonard Thompson. Now back then, if you had type 1 diabetes, you had a choice. You had to starve to death in about 1 to 2 years, or you went on a just eat anything you wanted and ended up in something called diabetic ketoacidosis and died rapidly. It was a horrible, horrible decision, particularly for parents of these little kids. But Len Thompson had been on this starvation diet for nearly 2 years. He weighed somewhere around 60 pounds. And his parents volunteered for this stuff, and they injected 7.5 cc's of this thick brown muck. For those of you that are on insulin, that's the equivalent of 750 units. Because it was very, like our insulin today is very concentrated, it's very dilute. And it led to an abscess in each buttock, but it lowered his glucose a little bit, and the rest was really looked at as a cure for diabetes. All the Toronto headlines were, diabetes cured by Toronto researchers. This is a patient in Cleveland, JL. So February 1922 was the first injection. Now it's available all over the world. And this patient JL in Cleveland, this is patient in December 15th, and this is patient JL after insulin. Wow. But the remarkable thing is that difference is in 2 months. In 2 months, this little boy tripled his weight and lived a full life thereafter. So everybody thought this was the cure, and the first publication was in the Canadian Medical Journal, and you've got a copy of this in the office if you want to read through it, because you can actually make your own insulin. So it's got a recipe on how to make insulin if you just have basic chemistry stuff. I don't think any of you will, but there's an interesting book. I forget her name, but she was caught during World War II in China and couldn't go back to Europe, and ended up with the help of a butcher making insulin. She wrote a book about it, so you can actually make it. They call it kitchen insulin. If insulin gets any more expensive, we're probably going to start making it. So Sir Fred was born on November 14th, and that's why every year on November 14th we celebrate or appreciate the epidemic or the pandemic of diabetes. World Diabetes Day, the American Diabetes Association recognizes it. The United Nations actually recognized World Diabetes Day. I think the first one, what was it, like 2007, thereabout. This year is diabetes and the family, the way it affects family members. Some people actually use the term type 3 diabetes. Type 1 diabetes is when your pancreas is shot. Type 2 diabetes, when your pancreas eventually is shot, but it's mostly because insulin doesn't work. And they say type 3 is all the family members that are supporting the type 1 and type 2. I think that's sort of cool. So this is World Diabetes Day a few years ago. Blue, the color of the United Nations, illuminated everywhere. One of these places, I think, here is Sir Frederick Banting's house in London, Ontario, where the flame burns blue, and it will be extinguished by the team that develops a cure for diabetes. So hopefully that'll happen real soon. But until then, we'll meet every November 14th or thereabout. This is the London Eye, illuminated in blue. And we recognize that every 5 seconds worldwide, somebody develops diabetes. Every 10 seconds, somebody passes away from complications of diabetes. And every 30 seconds, a woman is lost to diabetes. I think that in this country, right now, it's become an epidemic because we really can't afford it anymore. Next year, or a couple of years from now, nearly the whole Medicare, or the equivalent of the Medicare budget a few years ago, will be spent just on diabetes. But what is the most depressing thing to me is that 1 in 3 kids born today will have diabetes unless we can do something to stem the tide of this epidemic. Yet, you don't hear people talking about diabetes. You know you got an old audience when somebody actually laughs about this. Yeah, I get no respect. Diabetes is the Rodney Dangerfield of diseases. The numbers are massive, but we get no respect. Here in this state, about 11% of us have diabetes. This is a combination of type 2 and type 1 diabetes. And about 1 million people in this state have prediabetes. And we're going to talk a little bit about what is diabetes and what is prediabetes. So first, what's diabetes itself? Well, we talked about type 1 diabetes. This is a disease where the cells that make insulin are destroyed. These are antibodies that you make. You didn't cause it yourself, but those antibodies are there for whatever reason, and they gradually destroy the cells that make insulin over time. So sometimes we diagnose this very early, when there's still a little bit of insulin, I call pancreas sweat. And then you actually can get away without insulin, but eventually need insulin involved. Type 2 diabetes is mostly resistance to that insulin. So Lois always uses the analogy of the lock and the key. Insulin's a lock, you got plenty, or insulin is the key rather, you got plenty of the key, but the lock's busted. So even though you've got plenty of keys, you can't open that lock, and that's type 2 diabetes. Prediabetes is, well, as the name says, right before you develop that diabetes. And gestational diabetes usually happens in females because it's only So how do we diagnose diabetes? For those of you that have diabetes, you know what these numbers are. If you have a glucose of over 200 anytime, that's diabetes, particularly if you have symptoms of excessive urination, excessive thirst, excessive hunger. If you have a fasting glucose of over 126, that's diabetes as well. And if you have a hemoglobin A1C, we'll talk about that, over 6.5, that's diabetes. This is a test that we don't do much these days, except in pregnancy, where you give somebody 75 grams of glucose, really disgusting cola or orange, and then you check the sugar 30 minutes later, 60 minutes later, 2 hours later. So what's this number here, A1C test? Well, hemoglobin A1C is really just a measure of what percentage of your blood cells have sugar glued to them. So if your sugar's always normal, let's pick a number here. If your sugar's always 105, then about 5% of those cells will have glucose glued to them. So your fraction, the hemoglobin A1C, is 5%. If your sugar's always 240, then that number will come back 9. If your sugar is always about 150 or so, it'll come out somewhere close to 7. So we can actually do this test. It doesn't matter if you're fasting. It doesn't matter if you just had a Happy Meal. The A1C test will still be accurate, so it can be done on anybody, fasting or post-meal. So it's very convenient for the diagnosis of diabetes. You don't have to go to the lab test. So right now, if your A1C is 6.5, we say you have diabetes. But if it's 5.7 to 6.4, that's increased risk of diabetes or pre-diabetes. So if we look at a graph at what happens as type 2 diabetes progresses, this is where we make the diagnosis, this red line here. But even before that, with post-meal glucose, that's that orange line here, has started to go up, maybe 10 years before the disease. And only once the fasting starts to go up do we make the diagnosis. By then, you've been resistant to insulin. Remember that lock is not working. And you've been making more and more of the key here, but eventually that starts to poop out also. So if you're diagnosed with diabetes here, the diabetes you have here is not the diabetes you can have 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or 15 years from now. So our treatments change, constantly evolve due to this inexorable decline in the function of this pancreas. So more blue stuff on World Diabetes Day, that's Sydney. So what about pre-diabetes? What about if we find you over here? You haven't developed diabetes yet. You're still making a lot of insulin, but what we want to do is keep you from progressing from here to here. And that's what the Diabetes Prevention Program has been doing. It's an effort to lose about 7.5% body weight and to decrease the conversion of pre-diabetes to diabetes. But who's at risk? Is everybody at risk? Well, if you're over 45, you're at risk. So anybody over age 45 should have glucose checked every year. If you have a family history, first 3 relatives, you're at risk. If you're over 20% over ideal body weight, you're at risk. If you're high risk race or ethnicity, African American, Hispanic, American Indian, extraordinarily high. African Indian is about 50% diabetes. Previously identified, this is impaired fasting glucose and impaired glucose tolerance. These are pre-diabetes that we're talking about. Hypertension, high blood pressure in and of itself is a big risk factor for type 2 diabetes. So anybody with high blood pressure needs to be screened with their glucose. These are the cholesterol levels. So your good cholesterol, if your good cholesterol is low, your triglycerides are high, we call that insulin resistant pattern. That's a predisposing factor to diabetes. And finally, a big baby, 9 pounds, for pregnancy-associated diabetes. So is there anybody that doesn't fit in here? Not that many. Not that many people. So what fits your busy schedule better, exercising 1 hour a day or being dead 24 hours a day? We always put that in here as a plug for preventing diabetes with lifestyle modification. And that diabetes prevention program that I just mentioned, what they actually looked at were people with prediabetes. So these people, about 10% are going to convert to diabetes every year. And what they did was aim for 7% body weight loss, decreasing fat, decreasing calories, and exercising 30 minutes 5 days a week. Sounds easy, but they didn't actually keep that weight off. Nevertheless, look what happened at the end of 4 years. If you were just on regular lifestyle modification, your risk of developing, or you did develop type 2 diabetes about 35% of the time. Metformin, which is one of our first drugs that we use for type 2 diabetes, what we use in these patients to prevent diabetes, worked pretty well, decreased it by about 1/3. But that lifestyle modification decreased it by nearly 60%. And this was published in 2002, and have now followed patients for another 15 years, and these curves continue to diverge, even though these people didn't all stay on that diet. So there is some of this legacy effect or imprinting that probably does help us years down the road if we really jump on it early. So what is moderate exercise? Well, according to the American Diabetes Association, American Heart, it's about 150 minutes per week, so 30 minutes, 5 days a week. We've seen this earlier. It's about 3,000 steps per 30 minutes, 100 steps a minute, and if you sing Bee Gees Staying Alive, that'll be in the rhythm. We were doing CPR class, and somebody said, yeah, staying alive, but also another one bites the dust. Same rhythm. Bantam Lake. So now let's get to drugs for diabetes, managing diabetes. So why do we manage diabetes, first of all? Well, we know from a number of studies that uncontrolled diabetes increases the risk of stroke, increases the risk of eye disease, kidney disease, heart disease, and amputation. And these numbers are not here to depress you, but the bottom line is that small vessels, like the eyes and the kidney, are affected, as are large vessels, like vessels going to the brain, vessels going to the heart, and vessels going to the liver. As far as, does diabetes control health in type 1 diabetes, you'd think that everybody would say yes. But until it was the 1990s, 1995, the Diabetes Control and Complication Trial was published. Before that, some people said, we don't know that controlling diabetes really helps. And what this trial did was they looked at type 1 patients, kept their A1C either 9 or 7, and if you looked at where your A1C was, if at 7, your risk of developing eye disease after that 9 years was pretty low, but you get the idea. As the A1C numbers went up, particularly into the double digits, it became sort of logarithmically increase your risk of developing eye disease. And by eye disease, this was a progression in what's called background retinopathy to retinopathy where you need some treatment like laser. So after this, everybody wanted to control diabetes type 2. And it was pretty much the same study was duplicated in the United Kingdom prospective study, which looked at type 2 patients. And for every 1% decrease, you actually decrease your risk of either amputation or microvascular disease means kidney disease or eye disease, even stuff like cataract and heart failure was diminished. And that was just a 1% drop. So if you were at 9, going to 8, if you were 8, going to 7, 10, going to 9, you get the gist of it. You didn't have to necessarily bring it down to normal. You just had to improve the control. So drugs for diabetes. Well, for the next 18 hours, we're going to talk about our 12 classes. Because, that's what it would take. There are 12 classes of drugs now. We saw insulin. We saw Len Thompson getting insulin. We're not going to talk about all these. We're just going to really, I'm going to try to put them into groups on how these medications work. Because they all, if you look at these 4 classes or 4 mechanisms of action, we can put all those drugs in somewhere. Some help your body make more insulin. Some make your body use that insulin better. Remember the lock as opposed to the key. Some medicines lower the amount of sugar in the body in a different way, namely getting rid of it. And then finally, some medicines replace insulin altogether. That's of course insulin. So let's start with what makes your body make more insulin. Well, our oldest class of pills are these here, the sulfa drugs, the sulfonylureas. It was World War II. Some French chemists were working on sulfa antibiotics, and a lot of the patients were having reactions that looked like they were on insulin. And they actually were. They were having hypoglycemia. And that led to the discovery that some of these sulfa drugs can actually lower blood sugar, and the first sulfonylureas were made in the United States. The other ones are the DPP-4 inhibitors. We're not going to talk about these too much today, but some of you might be on Januvia, some of you might be on Tradjenta. And the last class here are the GLP-1s. And the GLP-1s are mostly injectable, and these are the ones that were all stemmed from the Gila monster. Does anybody remember when the Gila monster spit was in the news? It was. Yeah. So this is Helicobacter suspecta. It's a Gila monster. And the Gila monster makes a toxin in saliva, and this is the molecular structure of it. And it's very similar to what your own body makes in the gut. You make a hormone in the gut. It's called GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1. And we make these drugs that look just like GLP-1. Actually, the researcher at the VA in the Bronx was looking for something that looked like GLP-1, looking at the amino acid structure, and found this sort of on the shelf, if you will, that shared about 60% of the amino acids, and also had a similar action on glucose. So your own gut, if you're blue, your own gut makes this after you eat. You ever wonder why somebody without diabetes, the sugar doesn't go up and come back down? It's not like the sugar goes up and tells your pancreas to make insulin to bring it back down. They don't go up, they stay flat. So the body's not responding to a high blood sugar. It's not even going high. The body's doing this. When this person without diabetes eats, this chemical is made in the small bowel that goes to the cells that make insulin in the pancreas to make insulin, even though the sugar's still normal, secreting insulin, waiting for this food. It shuts down these cells called glucagon cells, which in turn decrease the amount of glucagon effect on the liver. The liver's always making sugar. Right now, all your livers are producing glucose. So if you have diabetes, you go to sleep at 100, you wake up 200, unless you have some medicine on board to shut that down. You're always producing glucose. So after a meal, this GLP-1 shuts down that glucose production by the liver, and it does two other things. It makes your stomach freeze, if you will. It doesn't empty, so you feel full. And then in the brain, it promotes satiety, so you don't eat. So if we could make this, wouldn't that be a great drug? Yeah. The problem is that if you inject this stuff, it's gone in about 2.5 minutes. It's got a very short half-life. So what they did was made some modifications in the molecule, and now we have all these medications that are GLP-1 receptor analogs. The first were Vieta. Bydureon is a long-acting one there. The next one was Victoza. That's liraglutide. Trulicity, which is once a week. Ozempic, which is once a week. These are all injectables. This one, Rybelsus, we'll look at a little bit later, actually right now. This is an oral agent that was just released. Nobody in this room is on it because it's not really available yet. But the FDA just approved it about a month ago. It's the first GLP-1 analog. That's what we call these agents. That's actually what we call it. So how about what makes our body use our own insulin better? The main one there is metformin. And the other one is pioglitazone, which is the brand name Actos. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with it. It's not used that much these days, but metformin, everybody in the room is on metformin. That's our #1 drug to use after the diagnosis of diabetes. And this one's got a pretty interesting history also. Gleba officinalis, the goat's brew, or French lilac, in medieval times was used to treat the diabetic state. Because one of the things in the plant is this thing called guanidine. So a chemist took that guanidine, this class metformin is called biguanides, and two of those molecules together, and now we have an agent that's used first-line therapy in everybody with type 2 diabetes, sometimes used in prediabetes, sometimes used in something called polycystic ovary syndrome. Really easy to use, can't cause hypoglycemia, reduces that production of liver that we talked about, glucose by the liver, and The best thing about it, it's free. Price Chopper gives it away for free. It's a loss leader from that. A lot of our diabetes medicines are very expensive for those of you that have diabetes who know that. So it's nice to see something that's generic, that's very cheap, and that actually works. This is most interesting to me, the most interesting class because it's brand new. The medicines that actually lower the amount of sugar in the body. And these are so-called sodium glucose transporter inhibitors. I call them sweet peas because it makes you urinate out glucose to reduce your glucose in the blood, to decrease calories, lose weight, decrease blood pressure. It sort of does everything right. And there's a bunch of them. There's the first one was Nimocana Canagliflozin. The next one was Jardiance, Farxiga, and the newest one is Latro, or Vertibuflozin. All of them end with Flozin. The first Flozin that we ever had was Florazin, and that was actually, take a guess, the precursor to all these. Was it 1960, 1950, or was it 1835? So 1835, these French chemists actually isolated a compound from the bark of the apple tree and found that it led to glycosuria, glucose in the urine. So they thought it was bad, but ultimately what it came down to was it was actually leading to excretion of glucose. And around 1900, it was appreciated that maybe we could use this to treat diabetes. The problem was there was a lot of side effects with this particular compound, like gut side effects, so it never really took off. We've appreciated that this is a potential treatment for diabetes for a long time. This is your kidney. You've got a million of these. They're called glomeruli here. You filter all this glucose. It goes through these tubes and goes out into the pee. So what happens is you filter 180 grams of glucose. That's about 45 sugar cubes a day into these tubules. Yet, how much do you put out in the urine? 0. So your kidney is reabsorbing all this gold, all this fuel, because it doesn't want to get rid of it. I don't know why we evolved this way, but you put it into the tubule, and all of it gets reabsorbed here.
Hello again, everyone. Doesn't Dr. Eggles Bogdanovich do a fabulous job presenting?
He really does, and it is great. It's great to hear the history, and I'm just kind of blown away by the many different treatments that we have now for diabetes.
Yep.
So, fabulous presentation. Come back next week for more. So that'll do it for this episode of Lying Around Connecticut with Carol and Harry. Bye now.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed our show this evening. Tune in next week for another Lying Around Connecticut with Carol and Harry. Good night.
Bye-bye.